Hi, I'm Lina. Welcome to Lina's Storybook, where we share the most unforgettable audio novels. Let's get started.
On the day I married the love of my life, his sister threatened to jump off a building. He completely abandoned our wedding ceremony, leaving me utterly alone to handle the murmuring guests. In my previous life, after I finally got pregnant and was about to give birth, his sister orchestrated the exact same manipulative trick. Sebastian abandoned me yet again in my most vulnerable moment. That cruel decision ultimately resulted in 2 lost lives. Me and my unborn child, dead in the desolate wilderness, brought back to life for a second chance. I found myself standing right at the beginning of that farcical wedding, this time, as the heavy cathedral doors closed, and the panicked whispers of his departure settled. I didn't act like I did in my past life. I didn't cry or beg him not to go. Instead, I remained perfectly calm, reaching out to silently adjust the lapels of his custom Tom Ford suit. "Be careful on the road," I said softly, my voice devoid of the desperate tremor that once betrayed my broken heart. Sebastian Sterling, my handsome groom, held my hands tightly, his eyes brimming with a profound, yet ultimately selfish apology. "I'm so sorry, Chloe Madeline. She really needs me right now," he pleaded. Madeline was his precious younger sister, treated as the absolute jewel of his life. Whether it was emotional validation or immense material wealth, she demanded an extremely high level of attention from her brother at all times. I stood in my sweeping Vera Wang gown, feeling the cold weight of the diamond ring on my finger, knowing exactly how this would play out. Even though I knew deep down that Madeline would never actually commit suicide, Sebastian still chose to abandon our wedding, leaving me standing alone at the altar. The murmurs of New York's elite echoed through the grand hall, but I held my head high. I calmly went to the bridal suite, changed into a stunning crimson evening gown for the reception, and gracefully stepped out to entertain our high society guests. I navigated the champagne toasts and the pitying glances with a flawless smile, holding down the fort until the entire lavish event finally concluded. It wasn't until the final guest had departed that Sebastian frantically rushed back to the venue. Panting and disheveled, he looked at me with guilt. "Madeline took some pills, but her stomach was pumped. She is fine now," he explained, running a hand through his hair. I looked at him, my expression the picture of a gentle, understanding wife. With a soft, magnanimous tone, I replied, "It is completely fine, Sebastian. Now that we are officially married, Madeline is my younger sister too." Upon hearing those words, his entire body stiffened in an instant. His expression shifted into something incredibly subtle and unreadable. In my past life, I had walked into this prestigious marriage entirely blind, my eyes shut to the dark reality of the Sterling family. I had absolutely no idea that my sole purpose in this union was merely to serve as a convenient fig leaf, a shield to cover up the scandalous relationship between the two siblings. Sebastian and his half-sister, Madeline, shared a deeply ambiguous, unspeakable connection that crossed all boundaries. Born to different mothers but sharing the same powerful father, they had grown up together under the same sprawling roof of the Sterling estate. Madeline was pathologically dependent on her older brother. She didn't just aggressively interfere whenever he tried to date. She eventually escalated to the point of sabotaging his ability to even casually associate with any other women. Arthur Sterling, their ruthless billionaire father, couldn't stand to watch the family name be dragged through the mud. To solve his headache, he forcefully played matchmaker, orchestrating the union between Sebastian and me. And Sebastian, desperate to protect his beloved sister's fragile reputation in high society, bit the bullet and agreed to the marriage. After we tied the knot in my past life, the siblings became virtually inseparable, flaunting their bond. There were even multiple occasions where, taking advantage of my absence, they blatantly slept in the same bedroom. When I discovered the horrifying truth, Arthur Sterling strictly warned me that family scandals must never be exposed to the public. Using a mix of terrifying threats and financial bribes, he absolutely refused to let me divorce his son. Trapped in that suffocating, humiliating marriage, I suffered through over 1,000 agonizing days. Later, I discovered I was pregnant. Foolishly, I believed that the arrival of a child would finally bring some peace and make my life a little easier. But I was dead wrong. my pregnancy only triggered an even more unhinged, escalating series of vengeful attacks from Madeline. During my second trimester, her vicious schemes nearly caused me to miscarry multiple times. I fought tooth and nail to protect my baby, finally making it to my due date. But on the very day my water broke, Madeline maliciously called Sebastian away with another fabricated emergency. I was left completely alone, stranded in a remote freezing cabin in the upstate mountains with zero cellular service. Ultimately, both my unborn child and I died a horrific, agonizing death in the snow. Fate, however, played a monumental joke on me, pulling me back from the abyss and returning me to the starting line of my tragic life. After the disastrous wedding concluded, Sebastian and I returned to our luxurious Park Avenue penthouse. The moment we stepped out of the private elevator, we found Madeline sitting barefoot on the cold Italian marble floor of the living room. Seeing this, Sebastian was instantly overwhelmed with distress. "Madeline, why aren't you wearing any shoes? It is freezing in here. What if you catch a cold?" He scolded gently. Without hesitation, he knelt down, using the warmth of his own palms to heat her bare feet. Over his shoulder, Madeline shot me a venomous, deeply provocative glare, declaring her victory. I simply smiled back, unbothered, and turned on my heel to walk into the master bedroom. I knew perfectly well that this night, which was supposed to be my romantic honeymoon evening, now belonged entirely to Madeline. Sure enough, Sebastian never came to my bed that night. He spent the entire evening desperately coaxing and comforting his sister. Early the next morning, the household's private chef prepared a lavish breakfast. The moment I walked into the sunlit dining room, I saw Sebastian tenderly feeding Madeline a glass of warm milk. She was a grown woman in her 20s, yet she tilted her head back, gazing up at him, and speaking in a sickeningly sweet childish voice. "You're the best, brother." Noticing that I had woken up and entered the room, Sebastian looked slightly startled, and hurriedly poured a glass of milk for me as well. "Chloe, come sit down and have some breakfast," he offered, his voice laced with forced normalcy. I calmly took a seat beside him and casually reached for a piece of golden toast from the silver platter. But before my fingers could even graze it, Madeline snapped at me with venomous authority. "Brother toasted that piece specifically for me. You are absolutely not allowed to eat it," she barked. Playing the obedient wife, I docilely pulled my hand back and set the tongs down. Seeing my submission, her smugness instantly multiplied. She picked up a heavy silver butter knife and began violently slashing at the piece of toast. The metal blade scraped heavily against the delicate bone china plate, producing a piercing, agonizing screech. That horrible sound echoed in my ears, mirroring the exact sound of her pinning me to the floor and brutally grinding my face into the ground during my past life. A cold fury ignited in my chest. Without a second of hesitation, I abruptly stood up, grabbed the edge of her plate, and violently flipped it over, sending the fine china, the toast, and her dignity crashing onto the floor. Madeline was so shell-shocked, she couldn't even process what had just happened. A second later, instinct took over, and she immediately burst into loud, hysterical tears. I brushed off my pristine blazer, entirely devoid of any desire to eat breakfast. Looking down at them, I delivered a freezing, emotionless remark. "I'm leaving now. You stay here and keep your precious sister company." Sebastian was completely dumbfounded. He never expected that I, the woman who had always been as soft and easily manipulated as a pushover, would undergo such a drastic sudden change in temperament. He awkwardly stammered. "Where are you going?" I picked up my designer handbag, turned to him, and flashed a standard impenetrable corporate smile. "To work, of course," I replied smoothly. Since the Sterling family had audacity enough to use me as their pathetic shield, it was only fair that I fully utilize this prestigious platform as my personal stepping stone. Regardless of the emotional betrayal, the corporate shares and the massive influx of capital that Arthur Sterling had transferred to my name upon the marriage were all very real, hard assets. I was determined to seize this golden opportunity to ruthlessly expand my own power and build an untouchable empire. When I strode into the executive suites of Sterling Enterprises, Arthur Sterling looked up from his mahogany desk, his face registering pure shock. "Chloe? You have a full month of honeymoon leave for your wedding. Why aren't you out traveling and enjoying yourself with Sebastian? He asked. I stared into his eyes, observing his sickeningly hypocritical smile. In my previous life, this was the exact same man who coldly told me that if I dared to file for divorce, he would hire professionals to murder my parents. To keep his daughter's vile secrets buried, he had ruthlessly chosen to sacrifice the life and happiness of someone else's daughter. Truly, not a single soul in the entire Sterling dynasty had an ounce of basic human decency. But in this lifetime, I masked my hatred perfectly, offering him a sweet, endearing smile. Dad, I was just so worried about how hard you're working. I really wanted to come back early and help share the burden with you, I said smoothly. Hearing this, Arthur was absolutely delighted. He sighed, shaking his head. Look at my own son and daughter. Combined, they aren't even half as capable and thoughtful as you are, he praised. Then gesturing grandly, he added, I've already had contractors renovate your new executive office. Go take a look. If there's any designer furniture you fancy, just tell your secretary to purchase it immediately. Thank you so much, Dad, I replied, sealing my position. Later, as I settled into my sprawling new office overlooking the Manhattan skyline, my assistant came in to serve me freshly brewed tea. While organizing files, she casually let a piece of gossip slip. By the way, I just saw that CEO Sterling booked 2 first-class tickets to a luxury resort in Paris. Chloe, you really have the best luck in the world. My expression remained utterly stoic, not betraying a single emotion. I knew with absolute certainty that those romantic Paris tickets were not booked for me. They were undoubtedly Sebastian's way of compensating his obsessive sister. I calmly closed the financial ledger in front of me and instructed her in a serious tone. Keep the booking of these tickets strictly confidential. Do not, under any circumstances, mention this to the chairman. In my past life, Arthur Sterling had constantly used both overt and covert tactics to obstruct the siblings' sick relationship. This only caused Madeline to unfairly project all her psychotic hatred and resentment directly onto my head, leading her to retaliate against me with escalating, unhinged cruelty. Therefore, in this new life, I was determined to play the role of the absolute perfect, most accommodating sister-in-law. I would graciously pave the way for this pair of star-crossed, tragic lovers. Not only would I happily serve as the Sterling family's PR shield, but I would also proactively run interference and provide them with airtight cover. Unsurprisingly, the extravagant Paris tickets were exactly what Sebastian had purchased to appease his sister. The two of them secretly conspired behind my back, announcing to the entire company and family that they were merely going on an international business trip to inspect overseas operations. In the days leading up to their departure, Madeline repeatedly flaunted her victory, dropping incredibly obvious, smug hints to my face. I simply played deaf, acting entirely oblivious to her pathetic provocations. Perhaps feeling a sudden pang of guilt, Sebastian approached me as he packed. Chloe, is there any special gift you want? I can buy it for you in Paris and bring it back, he offered, looking slightly ashamed. I looked up at him, smiling warmly, and spoke in the softest, most considerate voice imaginable. I don't need anything at all. Just promise me you won't work too hard on this trip. Okay, I murmured. At this stage in our doomed marriage, Sebastian still possessed a minuscule fraction of a conscience. He looked down at his shoes, guilt washing over his handsome face as he confessed. Marrying me. I know it's been a deep injustice to you. I stood up, gently taking the folded shirts from his hands to help him organize his Rimowa suitcase. Keeping my tone perfectly casual, I brought up my real target. By the way, that major contract with Julian Vance from Vance Capital. Have you managed to close that deal yet? He paused, clearly taken aback, and looked at me with deep suspicion. Why are you asking about that? You've never once shown any interest in my corporate business affairs before, he questioned. I just see how exhausted you've been lately with all this work, and I really wanted to step up and help take some of the pressure off your shoulders, I replied, meeting his gaze with nothing but fabricated devotion. Ever since we got married, Madeline constantly clung to him, Sebastian had zero time to focus on his work. He was desperate for a capable right-hand person, and my sudden willingness to step up was a massive help. He transferred the highly confidential files for the Julian Vance deal over to my secure drive. This CEO Vance is notoriously demanding and incredibly difficult to deal with, Sebastian warned. If you can't handle him, just leave it until I get back from Europe. I glanced at the dossier. Let me give it a try, I insisted quickly. Even if I fail, it won't negatively impact your standing. Sebastian and I had been talking for less than 10 minutes when a sharp knock interrupted us. Madeline pushed the bedroom door open. Brother, come watch a movie with me, please, she whined. Without a second thought, Sebastian dropped everything and followed her out. The two siblings had their own exclusive, secret sanctuary, a state-of-the-art home theater in the basement, complete with a starlight ceiling. Every time Madeline watched a movie, she absolutely demanded her brother sit by her side. She strictly forbade anyone else from entering that theater. Not even Arthur or their mother was allowed inside. Whenever she was in a bad mood, Sebastian would stay down there with her all night long, true to form. He didn't return to our room that night either. I simply didn't care. I woke up bright and early the next morning, and headed straight to the corporate office. Armed with the bitter experience of my past life, I mastered the company's complex operations with terrifying speed. While Sebastian was busy accompanying his sister on their lavish Parisian getaway, I was at Arthur Sterling's side, ruthlessly managing the empire's business. Utilizing my sharp professional expertise and keen market foresight, I earned Arthur's profound admiration and absolute trust in an incredibly short period. He frequently sighed, lamenting that neither of his biological children cared about him, whereas his daughter-in-law was his greatest asset in the business world. When Madeline finally returned from Paris, she was in spectacularly high spirits. She deliberately paraded around me, continuously showing off the sparkling Cartier diamond necklace Sebastian had bought her. You probably didn't know this, Chloe, but my brother spent 3 whole days just playing with me at Disneyland Paris, she gloated. We went on every single ride and even bought these gorgeous matching rings. Her face was plastered with the triumphant, petty smugness of a spoiled teenage girl. I immediately played along with flattering praise. It is absolutely stunning. The diamonds really complement your skin tone. Madeline was stunned that I wasn't the least bit angry. She froze for a second before pivoting to a sarcastic, passive-aggressive tone. Sister-in-law, I'm truly so sorry. This trip was originally supposed to be your romantic honeymoon with my brother, she sneered. I just never expected that he would completely abandon you, just to keep me company. I calmly closed the financial portfolio in my hands. Turning to look her dead in the eye, I replied with utmost sincerity, It's really okay, Madeline. From now on, whatever you want. I promise I will never fight you for it. But what I want, I thought to myself, is to systematically bleed the Sterling family dry, until they've compensated me for everything they owe. Without me reacting to her provocations, Madeline couldn't put on her one-woman show. After showing off for a while longer, she awkwardly slinked back to her room. From that day forward, a bizarre, highly delicate triangular dynamic formed within the household. I was the magnanimous, tolerant wife always turning a blind eye. Madeline threw constant, dramatic tantrums purely to validate her supreme position in her brother's heart, and Sebastian, naturally, spoiled her rotten, catering to her every whim. Emboldened, the siblings became increasingly brazen and uninhibited right in front of me. Arthur Sterling and his wife didn't live with us, but they occasionally visited for a few days and began to vaguely sense that something was off. However, because I constantly ran interference and covered for them, their suspicions were quickly smoothed over. Conscious of his guilt towards me, Sebastian began handing over even more high-profile corporate clients to me. Consequently, my workload exploded. Sometimes, I just slept in the executive suite at the office. Meanwhile, Arthur Sterling's health was steadily declining, requiring frequent trips to Mount Sinai Hospital. I was always the one by his side, tirelessly managing everything, dealing with the administration, picking up his prescriptions, and attending consultations. Even the chief of medicine couldn't help but remark, Mr. Sterling, your daughter is incredibly attentive and caring. Arthur's polite smile instantly froze on his face. His actual biological daughter only knew how to whine, throw tantrums, and act like a tyrant. When would she ever be this considerate? But he didn't correct the doctor's assumption, perhaps deep down. He was slowly beginning to accept me in the role of his true daughter, but I would never forget. I would never forget the terrifying threats and bribery he had used to trap me in this hellish family during my last life. Walking out of the private hospital wing, Arthur looked hesitant, as if he was struggling to find the right words. Chloe, Dad knows that marrying Sebastian has been deeply unfair to you. He started. The emotional foundation between you two is still unstable right now, but I promise, as soon as you have a child, everything will fall into place. The Sterling legacy must have an heir. You need to work hard on this, he urged. On the outside, I maintained the facade of a perfectly obedient, demure daughter-in-law. Internally, I was scoffing with absolute disgust. Given Madeline's psychopathic, hysterical nature, if I genuinely got pregnant, I would undoubtedly end up exactly like I did in my past life, dead alongside my unborn baby. Arthur was getting older, and his grip on both the corporation and his family was visibly slipping. At the next grand family dinner, he openly brought up the topic of us having a baby again. The second Madeline heard those words, she absolutely exploded. I forbid you from having a child, she screamed hysterically. I am the only person my brother is allowed to love the most in this world. Sebastian immediately rushed over to placate her. Madeline, please don't be angry. Dad is just casually talking, he coaxed. But Madeline was relentless. She grabbed Sebastian and aggressively forced him to swear a vicious oath. Swear it, she shrieked. Swear that if you two ever have a child, you will die a gruesome, horrible death. Trapped. Sebastian had no choice but to comply and repeat the sickening vow. I found the entire spectacle deeply, darkly hilarious. In my previous life, Sebastian and I did have a child. Yet, the ones who died a gruesome, horrible death were me and my innocent baby. It seemed that in this world, the true monsters never faced any retribution, while the innocent were condemned to eternal suffering. Hearing his daughter's outrageous, blasphemous demands, Arthur slammed his hand violently against the dining table. Madeline Sterling, let me make this perfectly clear. This family will absolutely not tolerate you spouting such unnatural, twisted nonsense, he roared. Your brother and your sister-in-law have already spoiled you far beyond reason. If the Sterling bloodline ends, I will hold you personally responsible, he threatened. Madeline, entirely unhinged, charged at her father, screaming at the top of her lungs. Without holding back, Arthur delivered a sharp, resounding slap across his daughter's face. That was the breaking point. Madeline's mental state was already incredibly unstable, and the slap sent her into a full-blown, thrashing meltdown of crying and screaming. Sebastian had to utilize every ounce of his energy and skill to calm her down. What a spectacularly chaotic dinner party. Arthur and his wife stood to the side, shaking with absolute fury. Madeline was violently smashing Limoges porcelain bowls and throwing plates. Desperately trying to flip the heavy dining table, Sebastian was frantically running around, trying to clean up the wreckage, while simultaneously attempting to mend the shattered relationship between his father and sister. I was the only one casually observing, utilizing every ounce of my willpower to suppress the massive smile threatening to break across my face. Needless to say, dinner was ruined. I politely chauffeured my in-laws back to their sprawling estate, then casually drove myself to a late-night bistro for a relaxing supper. After taking a leisurely stroll around the block to digest, I finally returned to our penthouse. The moment I opened the front door, I saw Madeline's entire body curled up intimately in her brother's arms. The two of them were huddled together on the expansive designer sofa, illuminated only by the dimmest, most suggestive ambient lighting. The atmosphere under the soft, sensual shadows was so thick you could cut it with a knife. It almost felt like a sin to interrupt them. Madeline's face was stained with dried tears. Completely exhausted from her violent tantrum, she had finally fallen asleep. Sebastian remained perfectly still, holding his sister in that same rigid, protective posture for hours. Ever the considerate wife, I quietly walked over, handed him a plush throw pillow, and then happily retreated to the master bedroom for a fantastic night's sleep. The following morning, I woke up thoroughly refreshed and energized. Sebastian, on the other hand, looked utterly miserable. Having stayed up the entire night, he was shuffling around the master bathroom, with massive dark bags under his eyes. I poured him a glass of warm honey water and handed it over. "Why don't you skip going into the office today? Stay home and take good care of Madeline," I suggested gently. Sebastian nodded wearily. "Thank you for working so hard for us," he murmured. "Oh, it wasn't hard work at all. In fact, Julian Vance, the notoriously ruthless CEO, who had previously ignored my relentless requests for a meeting, had finally relented today and agreed to see me. This was an opportunity I absolutely had to seize. Once I arrived at my office, I meticulously prepared the pitch deck and negotiation strategies for the day. Then, I headed straight to the towering glass headquarters of Vance Capital. Julian Vance was young, brilliantly successful, and notoriously cutthroat. I had formally requested a meeting with him no less than 10 times, and I had been flatly rejected every single time. I only managed to secure this brief window by pulling heavily on several high-level corporate connections. Even after arriving punctually for the appointment, I was left waiting in the sterile, icy boardroom for a full 30 minutes before he finally graced me with his presence. The very second Julian Vance strode into the boardroom, an overwhelming, suffocating aura of authority filled the space. His executive assistant politely set a cup of black coffee down in front of me. "Ms. Chloe, I apologize for keeping you waiting," Julian said, his voice smooth but devoid of warmth. I calmly placed my portfolio on the glass table. "Not at all. I arrived early," I countered smoothly. "These are my firm's proposals. Please take a look." Julian barely even glanced at the heavily researched documents before fixing me with an icy stare. "You are fully aware that my firm has an exclusive partnership with the Sterling Corporation. And yet, you have the audacity to waltz in here and blatantly try to poach their account," he stated bluntly. I knew there was absolutely no hiding my intentions from a predator like him. I came bearing contracts and absolute sincerity to secure this massive deal, but certainly not for the benefit of the Sterling family. From the very first day I joined Sterling Enterprises, I had been covertly headhunting and assembling my own private elite team of financial experts and operators. This shadow team had already reached a highly functional scale, fully capable of independently executing massive corporate accounts. By siphoning resources and utilizing the extensive network Sebastian had carelessly handed over, I had slowly and methodically secured numerous smaller lucrative contracts for my private team. But picking up crumbs wouldn't allow my empire to scale fast enough. That's why I set my sights on the ultimate prize, Julian Vance. If I could land his massive portfolio, I would have the financial leverage to instantly launch my own independent corporation. "Mr. Vance, business is driven purely by profit. If I can provide you with significantly lower operational quotes while delivering exponentially superior service, then choosing me is undeniably your most optimal solution," I pitched flawlessly. In the current economic downturn, every major conglomerate was desperately seeking to cut costs and increase efficiency. I refused to believe he wouldn't be tempted. Julian let out a cold, cynical laugh. "Compared to mere profit margins, I place far higher value on operational stability and proven capability," he countered sharply. "How long can a ragtag, makeshift team assembled in the shadows realistically provide me with top-tier, stable servicing?" Essentially, it wasn't that he wasn't tempted by the numbers. It was simply that he didn't trust my infrastructure. "Mr. Vance, my team is prepared to service your account entirely free of charge until you are 100% satisfied with our results," I declared boldly, flipping to the final page of my proposal. "These are the highly successful portfolios we've managed recently. I personally possess the operational capacity to handle your enterprise's complex needs. Give us a trial run. You have absolutely nothing to lose." Perhaps it was my sheer audacity and unwavering confidence that finally swayed him. Julian backed down slightly. He agreed to give me a strict 3-month probationary period. If he was fully satisfied with my team's performance after 90 days, I would secure an exclusive, ironclad 3-year contract. I expressed my deep professional gratitude and confidently strode out of Vance Capital. I worked intensely until late into the night before finally returning to the penthouse. Sebastian was, predictably, downstairs keeping his sister company again. The muffled sounds of the siblings laughing and playing echoed up from the basement home theater. It gave me a sudden repulsive wave of goosebumps. I quickly took a shower and went straight to sleep. Over the next few days, I worked relentlessly, pulling late nights at the office until dawn. With me out of the way, the two siblings became even more uninhibited and brazen in their behavior at home. Once, a wealthy neighbor ran into me and teasingly remarked that since I was never around, she almost assumed Sebastian and his sister were the actual married couple. I merely offered a polite smile and didn't respond to the invasive comment. It was the absolute truth. They desperately wanted to live like husband and wife, so I simply gave them exactly what they desired. For the following period, I practically lived at the corporate headquarters. I personally led my private team, dedicating all my energy and focus to executing high-level projects. Even the highly critical Arthur Sterling couldn't find a single flaw in my stellar performance. Ever since that disastrous family dinner, he hadn't dared to pressure me about having a baby again. He was terrified that his mentally unstable daughter would trigger another psychotic episode. If a scandal of that magnitude leaked, he would have nowhere to hide his face in New York's high society. Using the massive bonuses and capital I had quietly accumulated during this time, I purchased a sprawling new house for my parents, along with several prime real estate properties. My mother had no idea about the sick, twisted dynamic between the Sterling siblings. She simply sensed that I was deeply unhappy in this prestigious marriage. On multiple occasions, she gently asked me to tell her the truth, wondering if Sebastian and I were having issues. I casually brushed it off, assuring her that everything was fine, and telling her not to worry. Holding my hand, my mother told me she was securely saving all the money I gave her. She promised that if I ever truly couldn't endure the marriage anymore, my parents would always be there to support me. I nodded emphatically. My parents were my only true reliance in this world. The despicable man and his toxic sister were merely stepping stones for my ultimate success. My intense dedication to my career finally caught Sebastian's attention. He hadn't shown his face at the company in ages. Seeing my growing power and unwavering focus on my career gave him a deep sense of crisis. He approached me, suggesting that I didn't need to work so exhaustingly hard because the money he earned was more than enough for us to spend. I immediately used Madeline as my perfect excuse. I insisted that his sister's emotional state was still unstable, so he should stay home and keep her company. I knew perfectly well that Madeline's obsessive, prolonged, and pathological possessiveness was slowly becoming a form of torture for Sebastian himself. The siblings had depended on each other since childhood, making his feelings for her incredibly complex. But even the deepest affection wears down over time. Just as we had exchanged fewer than 10 sentences, Madeline burst into the room and grabbed his arm. She whined that she wanted to go see the ocean, and demanded he accompany her. I seized the opportunity, mentioning that I happened to have 2 VIP vouchers for the exclusive Pinecrest Hot Springs. I suggested they could go look at the ocean, and then relax at the nearby thermal springs. A look of disdain crossed Madeline's face. But she reached out and snatched the tickets anyway. She smugly remarked that I knew my place and that she actually did want to go to the hot springs. I laughed internally. I knew she had been using my iPad to constantly browse luxury hot spring resorts. So, I purposely went out of my way to book the most expensive remote tickets available, sending them off to play for a few days. By the time they returned, I would have fully secured Julian Vance's massive contract. Sebastian hesitated, noting that the round trip would take at least a week, and he still had work to do. Madeline glared at me, and told him to just dump the work on me. I quickly chimed in, agreeing to handle the company affairs, and urging them not to waste the hard-to-get tickets. Sebastian was still reluctant because the crucial year-end period was approaching. Madeline instantly threw a massive tantrum, crying and stubbornly insisting that she had to go. This was her standard manipulative trick, which she used heavily in my past life to wrap him around her finger. But eventually, tricks lose their magic when Sebastian gently asked if they could delay the trip until after the busy year-end rush because I couldn't handle everything alone. His apparent concern for my workload triggered Madeline's absolute worst psychotic meltdown. She was entirely accustomed to total control over him. I sighed loudly, pretending it was a pity, and threatened to give the tickets to someone else. Madeline shot me a venomous glare, firmly grabbing Sebastian's hand, and dragged him to the window. She threatened that if he didn't accompany her right that second, she would immediately jump to her death right in front of his eyes. Terrified, Sebastian frantically apologized and coaxed her, promising to spend a full week with her at the resort. The two of them secretly left the city behind Arthur and his wife's backs, with me providing perfect cover. Nobody suspected a thing. During that exact week, the deadline with Julian Vance arrived. My private team delivered a flawless perfect proposal. I successfully secured his massive 3-year contract. Once the contract was signed, he wired the first installment of funds. Armed with this initial capital, I finally had the leverage to break away from the Sterling family. My secretary tentatively asked if we should start scouting office rentals in the neighboring commercial tower. I put my designer pen down and told her there was no rush, as one massive bomb had yet to detonate. In my previous life, my tragic death served as the ultimate cover-up for their incestuous affair. After I died, Sebastian publicly declared he was too heartbroken to ever remarry. Madeline then moved into our matrimonial penthouse openly, claiming she was there to take care of her grieving brother. They shamelessly lived like husband and wife in everything but name, enjoying a perfectly happy life. In this life, I utilized the Sterling family to acquire immense resources and establish my own empire. I would eventually leave, but before I did, I was going to make sure they paid a devastating price. Arthur Sterling was hospitalized again for severe bronchitis. I visited him every single day, bringing him nourishing soup. He angrily asked about the whereabouts of Sebastian and Madeline, noting they had been completely absent. I put on a conflicted, distressed expression, vaguely suggesting they were busy. Arthur implicitly guessed the disgusting truth and furiously scolded me for failing to keep my own husband in check. I silently cursed him. He, as their father, couldn't control his own children, yet blamed me. Arthur sighed heavily, lamenting that he couldn't rely on his son for anything regarding the corporation. I quickly served him a bowl of soup, comforting him by saying I was handling all the company's affairs. I pulled out a detailed proposal for the upcoming corporate annual gala. Sterling Enterprises always hosted a grand year-end event to thank their clients. I suggested hosting this year's winter gala at the Pinecrest Hot Springs. I highlighted the luxury hotels, beautiful scenery, and the opportunity for the executives to relax in the thermal baths after the banquet. Due to his failing health and immense trust in my capabilities, Arthur delegated the entire planning process to me. I meticulously drafted the exclusive VIP guest list and booked the luxury suites and hot spring reservations. I calculated the exact timing, knowing with absolute certainty that the siblings would still be vacationing there. On the day of the gala, I arrived at Pinecrest Hot Springs early. The thermal baths here were co-ed and limited to 30 guests per time slot. I precisely calculated the time the siblings would be in the water and preemptively arranged for the hotel manager to clear the area. I then distributed the VIP bath passes to several key corporate partners of the Sterling Group, including Julian Vance. Leading this massive crowd of elite businessmen, we marched grandly straight into the exact hot spring, where the siblings were intimately bathing together like lovers. Seeing his 2 children in such a compromising picture, Arthur Sterling collapsed and fainted right on the spot. The other corporate partners exchanged horrified, knowing glances. The rumors regarding the Sterling siblings had always circulated in the shadows, but everyone had politely turned a blind eye. But now, they had essentially been forced to watch a live broadcast of the scandal. The Sterling family instantly became the biggest laughingstock, providing endless gossip for the elite. Julian Vance simply stood there with his arms crossed, watching the farcical drama unfold with a detached expression. Madeline, wrapped hastily in a soaking towel, charged out of the thermal pool and lunged at me, screaming that I was a vicious bitch who had framed her and threatening to beat me to death. Sebastian frantically rushed forward, physically restraining his thrashing sister with great difficulty. I put on a flawless performance of a devastated, heartbroken wife. I tearfully told Madeline that I had treated her like a real sister, only for her to commit such an unspeakable act. I loudly reminded them that they shared the same blood, and that their relationship was a twisted, deformed love. Sebastian's face was completely drained of color. He stared at me with pure icy hatred, snarling that he never expected me to be such a calculating person. I fired back without hesitation, telling him he had absolutely no right to judge what kind of person I was. Madeline tried to launch herself at me again, but was forcefully dragged back to their suite by Sebastian. Seeing that my ultimate goal was achieved, I turned on my heel and rushed the unconscious Arthur to the hospital. After settling everything and returning to the hotel, the scandalous rumors had already spread at the exact speed I had anticipated. Everywhere I walked, I could hear people whispering about how the siblings didn't know how to keep their distance. People openly gossiped that Sebastian was having an inappropriate relationship with his sister even before the wedding, which was why the old man was driven to a heart attack. I listened to the whispers all around me and nodded with absolute satisfaction. This was the exact effect I wanted. After finally pacifying his sister, a furious, desperate Sebastian tracked me down. He demanded to know if I had intentionally arranged for everyone to come to the springs purely to destroy him. My face remained perfectly calm. I shifted my gaze toward the distant, fog-covered peaks of the mountain range. The hazy white mist swirling around the mountains perfectly mirrored my previous life. In that past life I couldn't see the path ahead, blindly crashing around like a trapped animal inside those very mountains. But looking back at it now, the obstacles that once trapped me were nothing more than a few low hills. The hazy white mist was merely an illusion. My life was never meant to be anyone's convenient cover-up, and my destiny would absolutely not serve as someone else's stepping stone. Sebastian, everyone must pay the price for the choices they make, I told him coldly. His tone was vicious. Are you happy now that you've destroyed Madeline and me? He demanded. I corrected him flatly. The one who destroyed you wasn't me. It was yourselves. From the very beginning of their sick, incestuous relationship, Sebastian completely failed to control the boundaries of his emotions. He allowed his sister to develop unnatural affections for him, and in the end, the damage was irreversible. Madeline is having a complete mental breakdown. Are you trying to drive her insane? He snarled. I let out a cold laugh. Don't worry, she won't go insane. Perhaps this scandalous ending was exactly what she had wanted all along. With Madeline's unhinged nature, she couldn't care less about public opinion or societal judgment. She wasn't bound by any moral value system. She only knew that with this scandal exposed, the marriage between her brother and me existed only in name. This way, she could better monopolize him all to herself. She was probably secretly thrilled, but Sebastian was different. He was the eldest son of the Sterling family, groomed since birth as the corporate heir. He was bound by public opinion and shackled by morality. A secret, thrilling affair was fine for him, but an incestuous relationship exposed to the merciless public eye was absolutely fatal, and this would be the ultimate breaking point of their relationship. Arthur Sterling was hospitalized again due to extreme rage and stress. Under my flawless management, the corporate gala concluded perfectly. On the surface, I maintained the calm illusion, ensuring all the executives ate and drank well. Behind the scenes, I actively facilitated the free spread of the scandal, occasionally feeding the tabloids even more scandalous, highly entertaining details. In short, I wanted this matter to blow up spectacularly, in one fell swoop. After executing everything flawlessly, I finally sat down to rest. I ordered a cup of tea at the hotel lounge, sitting by the window to admire the mountain view. The Pinecrest Mountains were the most beautiful during this season. The trees were covered in white frost. From afar, it looked as if the peaks were blanketed in pure snow. Suddenly someone sat down across from me. I turned my head and saw Julian Vance. His tone carried unmistakable admiration, decisive, ruthless, and understanding exactly how to strike a fatal blow. "You have a lot of nerve," he praised. "Thank you, Mr. Vance," I replied. He took a sip of his drink. "I heard the best white tea here in Pinecrest is locally grown, and never sold to the public," he noted, glancing at my cup thoughtfully. I signaled the waiter and ordered him the exact same cup. "Yes, the yield is very limited, so it is not sold externally," I agreed. "But as the boss here, I can certainly treat you to a cup." Julian's expression wasn't surprised at all. From the first time I approached him, he knew exactly what kind of person I was. To succeed, one must have a calculating heart, a sweet mouth, and ruthless methods. This was the absolute truth I had only comprehended after dying once. "With such a massive scandal, I assume your marriage with Sebastian can no longer be maintained?" he asked smoothly. I smiled slightly. "We never actually signed a legal marriage certificate. Naturally, this was all to appease his precious sister. When we held the wedding ceremony, Madeline had stubbornly refused to let us have a legally binding marriage, even threatening suicide to stop it. Getting the license was simply shelved. But it was perfect. It saved me an immense amount of legal trouble now." Julian's hand gently brushed over the rising steam from his teacup, as if trying to grasp something ethereal. He was born with a profoundly calm and reserved face, and eyes like cold, piercing stars. He looked at people coldly, but when he spotted prey, a subtle spark would ignite in his gaze. "So, that means you are completely single right now," he stated. I shrugged nonchalantly. "Whether I am single or not isn't the most important thing to me," I replied. Julian revealed a warm smile and pulled a pristine business card from his pocket. "But it is very important to me," he countered. The card contained his private, unlisted phone number, a number he rarely gave out to anyone. This meant our relationship could progress further. After saying that, he stood up and gracefully left the lounge. He understood the art of flirting flawlessly, knowing exactly when to stop. After finishing my tea, I went upstairs to check on Madeline. She was lying in bed while Sebastian desperately coaxed her to eat some porridge. "Madeline, please eat something. I'm begging you," he pleaded. She angrily pressed her lips shut. Seeing me enter, she screamed, "You disgusting bitch, what are you doing here? Get out!" I simply clapped my hands together. "No ulterior motives. Just reminding you too that your father is still hospitalized. So maybe show some concern for his life and death," I said lightly. Arthur had just barely survived a critical condition, only to hear that his family's grotesque scandal was the hottest topic among the elite circles. He immediately fainted again. After the doctors finally managed to hook him up to an IV and stabilize him, he woke up screaming and crying that he didn't want to live anymore. Deeply ashamed of facing his ancestors, the Sterling family's disgusting catastrophic scandal remained the absolute laughingstock of high society for a solid month. I couldn't have been happier to see it. Right after the incident, I rapidly packed up all my belongings and moved straight back in with my parents. They firmly stood by my side, insisting I cut all ties with the Sterling family permanently. After falling ill, Arthur lost all energy to manage the corporation's affairs. Sebastian had no choice but to step up himself, but he had been completely detached from the business for far too long. Add to that the constant, suffocating clinginess of his unhinged sister, and he couldn't find a moment of peace to work. Sterling Enterprises' business plummeted overnight. Eventually, Sebastian was forced to swallow his immense pride and beg me to come back and save the company. But I had already leased a massive office space in the adjacent skyscraper and established my own independent firm. I took my elite team and launched my corporation. The major clients I had previously siphoned from the Sterling family were now entirely my own loyal partners. "Sebastian, when you shamelessly used me, you should have expected this day would come," I told him coldly. "Chloe, no matter what happened, you wouldn't be where you are today without the Sterling family," he pleaded desperately. "For the sake of our past relationship, please come over and help me." "Past relationship?" I sneered. "In my previous life, when they callously murdered me and my baby, did they ever think about our past relationship?" I immediately ordered him out, From now on, the mountains are high and the rivers are long. We have absolutely nothing to do with each other. Sebastian walked away, thoroughly defeated and humiliated. After that day, I never deliberately sought out news about the Sterling family. I only heard passing rumors that due to catastrophic mismanagement, Sebastian could no longer sustain the corporation and was forced to sell it off to competitors at a pitifully low price. My life had completely ushered in an extraordinary new chapter. I now had immense wealth, elevated status, and a booming career. As long as I desired it, I could do absolutely anything. Lately, Julian Vance frequently visited my company. Using business negotiations as an excuse, he constantly invited me out to lavish dinners. Even my secretary noticed the obvious tension. "Chloe, does CEO Vance have a crush on you?" she teased one day. I just smiled, remaining silent. A man's affection is historically very shallow. He only looked at me with high regard because I was successful and powerful. His affection was merely the novelty of seeing a woman viciously fight her way out of a brutal siege. My stance was to neither initiate nor reject. I wouldn't refuse his goodwill, but I certainly wouldn't actively pursue his love. Even if I ever wanted to step into another marriage in the future, I had to think it through with absolute clarity first. Julian was incredibly patient. He showered me with top-tier resources, integrating me into his exclusive inner circle, and introducing me to powerful business tycoons to rapidly expand my empire. In return, I provided him with the absolute best operational services within my capabilities. Mutual benefit and reciprocity are the only true secrets to a long-lasting relationship. Eventually, he couldn't help but directly ask me what my long-term intentions were. I thought about it for a moment, then asked him seriously, "Julian, if I enter your circle purely as your woman, enjoying your resources, then once we separate, will those resources be immediately confiscated?" He was stunned into silence, because the honest answer was yes. The relationship between a man and a woman is the most fragile, unreliable thing in this world. Just like my past life in the Sterling family, because I had lost my utilitarian value, nobody would mourn for me, even if I died. I was determined to be a person who inherently possessed her own immense value, rather than relying on another's power to climb the ranks within this systemic game. This was the ultimate truth I comprehended the second I was reborn. Julian's affection for me was built entirely on the foundation of my own power. Only by standing on equal formidable footing with him did I earn the right to be seen and respected. Julian quickly clarified, "Your desire for a career and my affection for you are not mutually exclusive." I gazed out towards the distant horizon. The Pinecrest Mountains remained exactly the same, surrounded by swirling mist under a hazy, beautiful moonlight. The scenery hadn't changed, but the mindset of the person viewing it had transformed entirely. In the past, all I saw was the oppressive, blinding fog. Today I saw a magnificent, breathtaking landscape. Julian perhaps still didn't fully understand what it was I truly desired. An evenly matched love, unrivaled, equal capability, or perhaps the courage to meet at the absolute peak of success. These were all things I was entirely denied the choice of having in my past life. On that freezing night when my baby and I died in the desolate wilderness, I watched the fog roll out from the Pinecrest Mountains, rushing endlessly toward the boundless moonlight. Right then, I knew the heavens were sending me a sign. Even trapped in a deadly cage, one can still struggle and fight to survive. Julian Vance would make an excellent partner. Yet, he wasn't exactly what I was truly searching for. That was why he repeatedly asked me what my ultimate pursuit was. "What I have always been pursuing is the freedom of choice," I replied softly.
That's all for today. I'm Lina. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more amazing stories every week. Thanks for watching.